The general trend, I think, is it's going to be normality, having synthetic data in the industry. It's going to be a normal situation in some area. So I think the main important point is validation. Validation in terms of what we generate synthetic and combine with the human smaller sample size, do we get to the same business conclusion? Yeah.
Este programa llega gracias a Grupo OMG y con el apoyo de Gloria.
Hola amigos de Marcas y Mercados, estoy con el doctor Nikolai Reynolds. Nikolai es doctor en Ipsos, él es director global de innovación y hoy día ha venido a conversar con nosotros sobre data sintética. Gracias. Thank you, Nikolai, for being here. There's a lot of things that I want to ask you about scientific data, and I'm going to start because this can be long.
Looking forward to the conversation.
What is scientific data and its generation process?
Okay, so there are many different ways to define synthetic data, and depending on the textbook you look at, or you ask, generally synthetic data can be seen as basically artificial data, which is based on real data. It tries to mimic but not duplicate the original data.
That's very important. Do you say mimic but not duplicate?
Yes, ideally it doesn't duplicate. I mean, depending on the methodology you use, and in statistics and methods, you have many different options there. For instance, bootstrapping is one option where there are different bootstrapping options, but one option is where you duplicate the data, and that's not the correct way to create synthetic data. We want to create data which looks like, but it doesn't duplicate the original data.
And what is the distinction between synthetic data and real world data?
Okay. So I think the distinction of real world data is basically human data, which we collect through surveys, for instance, or passive observations or social media data generated by real humans. Yeah? Synthetic data builds upon that or derives from the human data. So we're basically using knowledge of the real world to create additional artificial data, which helps us in specific ways of analysis or provides us, better insights, deeper insights for hard-to-reach target groups.
And what's the benefit of it?
So the benefit is really depending on the use case. So I think there's often a misconception that there's a general AI model that works in all cases. And whether the AI is to build synthetic data or create text like large language models or visuals or whatever, the benefit is always relevant to, or the benefit is very important in terms of the use case you're creating it. So for instance, product testing very often is very expensive because clients need to produce the prototypes or source the products from the market. We need to make sure that the batch number are identical. You need to recruit consumers, which are sometimes very targeted, very specific to consumer groups, which have low incidence rates, which mean that they do drive the cost and the height. And then you have all the security measurements applied to product testing. And all these create costs and also increase a lot of timing in terms of if you want to go quickly to the market. So the thinking there is to use, a synthetic generation approach in product testing to shorten the time for the clients and also make product testing more efficient with minimum, let's say, the reduction in terms of insights or security or validation. So that's why it needs to be very applied in a very specific use case. There is no general model which works with all use cases. So the development needs to be really focused on the use case and make sure that the benefits for that use case are given that makes work to generate and develop the whole approach.
And in your experience, each case it's like a world, no? We cannot apply everything to everybody. But when are the best cases in which we can apply synthetic data?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we focus on product testing, for instance, there are different areas to apply it. For instance, in very early stage prototype screening, when businesses produce, different types of prototypes, and they want to limit the number of prototypes to focus on the most relevant ones, and then go into full consumer testing. That's one scenario. Or also in other scenarios when it's about understanding how products perform in the market, and you're thinking about benchmarking. For instance, benchmarking your own product versus the competition, but you don't have the budget to do a full-scale benchmarking. That's also in this scenario. But there are also scenarios in terms of high-risk situations where you have very important products, high important brands, and you want to focus on specific subgroups. So you keep, the original all-human sample, but you use synthetic to boost subgroups, to deep dive in the analysis of those subgroups.
Okay. And the application, well, we've been talking about the applications in product testing. How can synthetic data augment traditional product testing methods?
Okay. So that's a simple question, but has a long, quiet answer to it. So I think the main important point is validation. Validation in terms of what we generate synthetic and combine with the human smaller sample size, do we get to the same business conclusion? Yeah. So if we're talking about how to augment that, we've done two big pieces of research. One bigger piece of research was to understand, in product testing, you have usually a sample size of 200, 300 per product, or 150, depending on the use case. What we first looked at is what minimum sample size can we go to get to similar business conclusions, just reducing the sample size to make it more efficient. So we've done a big research there across 84 markets, across 180 different categories, 40,000 consumer responses, where we looked at what sample size do we get to some similar conclusion just with reduction. There we noticed sample size of 50, you get a kind of a good correlation. The correlation is not, let's say, strong enough to build business decisions on in most cases, because it's just 50 and you can't go into subgroup splits. The statistical power is quite low with a sample size of 50. That's why the idea there is, okay, to start off with a smaller sample size, such as 50, to generate synthetic consumers based on the 50, or maybe 75 or 100, and then augment the sample in such a way that you add the synthetic with the original human data, and you achieve then the sample size as the original 150, 200, 300. Yeah, that's how the augmentation basically works in terms of product testing. And of course, there is some risk if you're using a smallest human sample size with a full synthetic sample size in combination. But the risk is always related to the business objective.
And how do we pick these people that are going to help us to augment our database?
That's a very important point. So the quality of the so-called seed sample, which you use to generate the synthetic sample, needs to be, of course, very good. What I mean with that is, if you, for instance, in an ordinary product test where you would recruit 200, 150, 300 consumers, for instance, per product, you have in the questionnaire recruitment quotas, and you basically recruit those consumers from a total universe, can be multiple millions. Yeah. So the same rules in terms of recruiting, those 200, 150, or 300 from the original total population applies also to the seed sample. So for validation purpose, we have basically made sure that the seed sample reflects the sample structure as the original sample. With the quotas, demographics, and all that. And then we use that sample to generate the synthetic sample, combine the sample, and compare that with the original. Yeah. Why we're doing it, why this validation is important, because if you would run a product test just with 50, 100, or 75 consumers, you're basically reducing the general sample size which you start off with, and you need to make sure that those 50, 75, and 100 are still good enough. Yeah, that's why we do all the validations.
All the validations, and the sample, the 50 or the 75 have to represent the target that we want to. Yeah. And then it's not duplicate. That's the word that we're not using.
Yeah.
It's augment our.
Yes, we're creating basically new respondents. One important point there is that if we are, using the seed sample to generate the synthetic consumers, that the data quality is of course good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in product testing, if you use 200 consumers, you want to make them sure that they're good as well. And that just applies also to the smaller sample size. Yeah. Sample size, or let's say representativeness, has not so much to do with sample size, but with sample structure. That's important because if you think about the total consumer population of 4, 5 million, 8 million, and you have basically, a sample size of 200, doesn't, how you need to make sure how does 200 reflect the total universe. Yeah. So you apply the same specification, same quotas on the 50 and 75. Now, why this works for product testing and not for other areas of application, is because the product itself defines the variance of consumer behavior. So you can, for instance, if this would be, a sweet beverage, you can only increase the sweetness to some level where all consumers say it's too sweet. Yeah? So the product itself defines to some extent the variance.
Okay.
In medical sciences, you sometimes use very small sample sizes to use to apply statistical testing. You reduce in medical areas, the sample size because you have measurement instruments to measure, the product differences. Yeah. So where you can use a smaller sample size. Yeah. So that's why it's important to always consider what use case can we apply the generation of synthetic data
for each.
Yes, for each use case.
And the future of scientific data in market research. What emerging trends are appearing in scientific data?
Well, I think it's a hot topic, and if you think about what types of synthetic data there are, there's like full synthetic samples which you use in audience measurement. There are this area of using, for instance, persona bots, where you basically chat with a segment, for instance. Yeah, and then there's also data fusion and imputation. And then there's augmentation of samples. Yeah. So the different four general types of synthetic generation. And the trend, I think, is really, I think there's a general trend of talking about and making, trying to generate synthetic consumers and as a general population, which you can use for every application. I think we're still far off of that because we understand that every business objective has, again, its unique business case. Yeah. The general trend, I think, is it's going to be normality, having synthetic data in the industry. It's going to be a normal situation in some area.
Este programa llega gracias a Grupo OMG y con el apoyo de Gloria.